At that time, there was nothing more I wanted than a live-action Resident Evil movie.
This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Trailer to Reaction. I didn't hate Paul W.S. Anderson's 2002 movie Resident Evil. It wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible, especially when you take into account the follow-ups to it. It was actually pretty decent in that regard. Though, you probably know that George Romero, the guy who did Dawn of the Dead, Night of the Living Dead, and so on, was for a time developing a Resident Evil movie. And I would have liked to have seen that movie. For whatever reason, Capcom didn't like his approach to the material and pretty much fired him. Though I can't accept the idea that what he had intended for Resident Evil was anything worse than what Paul W.S. Anderson actually did. I mention this because there is a documentary, George A. Romero's Resident Evil, about that process, about George A. Romero's version of Resident Evil, which is something I'm really interested in. So let's take a look at that trailer.
He made Night of the Living Dead in 1968.
George's films literally changed the face of horror as we know it.
The Capcom didn't hide the fact that the games were inspired directly by George Romero's films.
At that time, there was nothing more I wanted than a live-action Resident Evil movie.
And George is making Resident Evil.
And then suddenly, the plug was pulled on this.
You could tell he had misgivings about doing a zombie project for someone else.
This film just feels so much more gory, so much more violent, and so much more angry.
This guy knew Resident Evil.
How did we not get this?
It's a mean-spirited market that is mostly controlled by people still that have no affection or affinity for not only this genre, but for movies in general. They think that they're buying you.
He would not sell his soul just to get a film done.
If anybody was going to do the Resident Evil series justice, it would have been George Romero.
I remember he wrote, "When there's no room in hell, I'll see you in Pittsburgh."
George A. Romero's Resident Evil.
Everyone's gonna die!
Well, that was the trailer for George A. Romero's Resident Evil, a documentary. And while I don't have much information about what was going on between him and Capcom, though there's a link to the actual Resident Evil script that George Romero wrote in the body. Though I doubt it was as black and white as some of the people in that trailer seem to say it was. In which case, you have George Romero knowing so much about the property and Capcom being hell-bent on him not doing it. I'm not sure that's true, but I still wonder what Resident Evil would have become if George Romero had directed. So what do you think? Do you agree, disagree? Let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like or a follow. Peace. And have a great day.